what is the key to interpreting Pauline corpus without losing its essence and true meaning? And can you please give us a paradigm on reading Paul in the 21st century without uprooting him from the first century setting?
As I said earlier, mission is the core of Paul's theology, for my understanding. And rest everything falls around that at different levels. So for me, the best way to avoid misinterpreting Paul, either trying to interpret him from a doctrinal position of the modern church, or to interpret Paul through any other way, the best would be to uphold the missional lens and then to read Paul's writings and his theology through the perspective of mission. Okay, as I said earlier. So in that sense, what we must try to understand is not Paul's theology of mission, but what we need to understand is Paul's missional theology. The theology itself is missional, essentially missional. So Christ is not studied for the sake of understanding Christ and his person and his work, but Christ, his person and his work is studied and understood for the missional purpose for which Paul was explaining the whole thing. So it is not theology of mission. Theology of mission can be anything. You can have many things, multiple locations you can start, but it has to be missional theology. So that is the best way, to my understanding, to interpret Paul, to crack some of the hard areas of Paul's writings or Paul's thoughts. Mission is the way. Missional reading is perhaps the best way to go forward to understand Paul.
The majority of church traditions, including doctrines today, is founded on Paul's teachings through many of the principles or norms set forth in his letters are culturally determined.
Okay.
If so, how can we apply them to disciplines in the present day church? For example, women covering their heads, wearing ornaments, women being asked to be silent within the church, women being submissive to their husbands. In contemporary times, how should we take these principles without diluting the instructions?
Pastor, since it is in relation to interpretation that he is asking, I will give quickly a couple of points. I think if you have to really handle such things today, we need to do a few things. Number one could be focus on what Paul is saying and why he says that. Not just on what he's saying, but why is he saying that? For example, head covering is an issue in Corinthian church and it is not said anywhere else. Then we have to ask why in Corinthian context he says and why not in other context. That's the first point. So that will give you the length and breadth of, or the universal application or contextual significance of that particular topic, whatever you're researching or interpreting. Number one. Second could be understand the literary and the social context. Within the literary context, preceding verses, following verses, in that section you have to understand that what is he saying? Why is he saying? And then relate that within a social context, because all the instructions of Paul are emerging within a social context. See, I greatly appreciate the work of Christiana Becker because he comes and says something very important in a very simple way. Although he has written a big book, the contingency and coherence, both. Paul has a coherence thought, but it is contingent. Both needs to be understood. It is in relation to a particular social context he says something. So that we have to understand. Then we will understand, okay, whether this is to be universally applied or this has to be taken in that limited sense. Okay, because every letter was written to address a particular situation. Corinthians, Romans, Galatians, Philippians, everything was written to a particular context. So that is the second. Third important thing would be separate the contextual force of the instruction before making it a universal stuff. Whatever is cultural, contextual material, remove that. And take the truth from there and then see how that truth applies to you today. If it is kind of oppressive, you can do away with that because that is emerging out of a contextual point. But if it is applicable, please use it. So separate that. It's important. Finally, I would say a good way to check what should be universally applied and what not, my own thinking I'm saying, is to check whether in other context on the same issue, what does he say? Sometimes you will find he speaks contradictory things. Sometimes you will find that he adds another dimension to the thing. So you cannot take this verse alone and make it mandatory and impose it on others. You have to take the other verse because the whole scripture is authoritative, right? This part or that part. It comes earlier or later. Even the smallest letter has got an instruction which is as important as Romans or Matthew or Acts or anything. So what you have to do, you have to take both and then keep both different, seemingly different, contradictory, seemingly contradictory, different dimensions. Keep them together and then look for the truth in between these seeming polar opposite positions. If you are able to balance between the two and come to a point, you will get the right point. What you have to make sure that it should be there in the church and what you can decide that, okay, this is not that cardinal to my faith. So my practice.
So your take on these subjects is that it is contextual to the church and it is not universal, Pastor.
If it is universal, I believe, if it is universal, it will appear in some sense
in other scriptures,
other portions also. If it is appearing only in one part, then you have to understand that this is only to that specific context because Paul was addressing specific contexts.
Okay. So can we rightly say that if we have to derive a doctrine, we cannot derive a doctrine from one single isolated scripture, but it needs to have supporting words or supporting scripture from other place also so that we can bring it as a doctrine.
100%.
Yeah.
We cannot formulate a doctrinal position by one particular instance.
But you have mention of this in the Old Testament, and so when I talk about this, so you are telling that we need to have similar quotations in the New Testament to make it a doctrine for the New Testament church.
Not just similar quotations, but on the same thing, what he is saying the other side. Sometimes it may be a little different or nuanced. So you need to put both together and then see where they both meet.
Right.
It is there that is important. In the absence that woman cannot have any role in the church, in the absence of that statement, the silence of woman only in Corinthians must be taken with a pinch if you want to apply universally that.
Right.
Always, Paul said that, no doubt. It's authoritative. But why did? Because Corinthians had a specific situation.
Right.
To them, those women, Paul is saying, keep quiet.
Yes.
When you speak, you create problem. Go home and ask your husband. But Judea and Syntyche, when they were quarreling due to some personality problem, Paul says, please bring solution between them. They are so useful. They are my fellow workers. That's the way we need to balance the thing. We cannot take one part and forget the other side.
You are telling it is more of an interpretation issue than a doctrinal issue, and
it has to be handled interpretively.